Hi, everyone. This is Scarlett Johnson, and I was going through doing my research on the new online LGBTQ plus student support module series dropped just yesterday by the Wisconsin DPI, or the Wisconsin Department of Instruction. And that is the state agency that basically regulates all of the Wisconsin public education and sets the standards for education and provides a lot of the professional development training for the educators in our state. It does a great deal of many things. And so I thought, you know what, I should just kind of put this online and go through it live. I want to show that, first of all, I want to share my screen and kind of show what I saw yesterday. Right here. This is the new online LGBTQ plus student support module series. And you can see the Wisconsin Department of Instruction has created new short videos which focus on key areas for increasing LGBTQ plus student support knowledge, developed by the DPI staff in collaboration with GSAFE. These models can be used individually, with groups, used for staff professional development. You can watch separately, get together and discuss, and serve as the necessary requirement to get out to wear the Out for Safe Schools badge. And basically, if you've seen some of the GSAFE stickers in classrooms, going through these modules would be a way for an educator to obtain the badge that they could put on their door in their classroom to identify that they are ready to talk about these issues, and can also be worn as a lanyard. So we're going to go through now. These were 2 modules that have dropped so far, 2 recordings, and there will be more. Notice that October 11th, 2023 is National Coming Out Day. So we'll go back to stop sharing the screen. And we're going to I've fast forwarded a little bit of the training. Put that on screen. So I'm going to bring up the screen of the recording because I think that will be better than me just talking about it. Sorry, this is going so slow. I'm just getting used to doing this. Okay, so we'll just go back to here. We'll start. So start the course. The interview.
Are made possible by funding from Project Aware. The topic of today's module is basic LGBTQ plus concepts. This module will focus on big concepts and some vocabulary, but mostly concepts. These are basic building blocks to understanding LGBTQ plus students and their identities. This module will also cover how to ask questions when you don't understand the terms and concepts being shared or discussed. Today's module will feature Brian Jukums, co-director of GSAFE. In his role at GSAFE, Brian J. regularly provides professional development for K-12 educators and staff across Wisconsin. He regularly serves as a sounding board and consultant for district leaders in developing and implementing policies and best practices that help LGBTQ plus youth feel safe.
Fast forward through some of this and
who are showing up in this world that with bodies that don't fit those 2 kind of stereotypical categories.
So right here we
I'd also like to
gender
remind people that when we're talking about sex assigned at birth, we're in part talking about what's between our legs or our private parts, right? And it's important to read.
So in the beginning, he discusses sex assigned at birth and basically says that typically, and this, he's framing this discussion in such a way that the educator would have some insight how to talk to students about these concepts. And the students' age range would be from kindergarten to high school. And obviously, when you're looking at the gender snow person, this isn't really meant for a high school student. This is meant for elementary school kids. And that's the feeling that I got through this whole series, that the way that he is talking and the language that he's using is meant to start to teach gender ideology to kids at a very young age. And if Wisconsin has recently rolled out comprehensive sexuality education as an option for human growth and development, and Wisconsin statute does not require a district to teach human growth and development, and it does not require comprehensive sexuality education. That is something that a school board can adopt and implement. I wanted to get to some more interesting parts of this. You can see here it says when I was born.
And then as I grew up, that assignment made sense. My sex assigned at birth lined up with my gender identity.
So obviously, sex is assigned at birth. The doctor looks at the genitals, the parents look at the genitals, and they make a guess. This is their version of science.
I always knew I was a man. I never had to put one.
Let's fast forward some more.
Sexual orientation. While gender identity is about how you feel about yourself, sexual orientation is how you feel about other people. It's who we have crushes on, or who we want to hold hands with, or who we might want to marry someday if you're into marrying.
So again, you notice the language here. This is not how you would talk to even middle schoolers. You wouldn't talk to a middle school student this way. You wouldn't talk to a high school student this way. The language that they're using, this is meant for very young children, in my opinion.
It's important to note that some people don't experience any attraction to other people at all as well, and that's valid too. So that's sexual orientation. Again, gender identity is how we feel about ourselves. Sexual orientation is how we feel about other people. They are not necessarily indicators of each other. They don't, if somebody's gay, that doesn't mean that they're trans. Because someone's trans doesn't mean that they're lesbian or straight, right? So those inform each other, but they don't determine those other identities for folks. So finally, all around our snow person is gender expression. And gender expression is simply how we communicate our sense of gender to the world, right? So gender expression is...
Wouldn't this be personality? Wouldn't this really just be a reflection of all the various personalities that are very unique? I think that there's a lot that it's kind of ridiculous to, again, and a lot of stereotypes are stereotypes that we once tried to break away from are being reinforced here. I want to fast forward past some of this, maybe a different time when I have more time I can.
Maybe their school, their workplace, and or of a lack of feeling safe wherever they happen to be. Additionally, folks who are non-binary are not necessarily androgynous in their gender expression.
Before this, he made the point, and he makes this point several times in this series, that be careful because kids probably don't feel safe expressing their gender identity or their gender expression at home. And they may not be supported, and home may not be a safe place. This is said several times throughout this series. Home may not be a safe place. Parents may not be safe. Families may not be safe. This is stressed way too much.
It's an image that we often think of, or what first comes to mind when we think of folks who are non-binary. But what we know is that someone who's non-binary can be very feminine, or maybe very masculine and still be non-binary. And before we wrap up the snow person, I do want to circle back.
This I think is kind of interesting and important, so pay attention.
To the gender binary for a second. And it's really important, especially here in Wisconsin, to acknowledge that there are many cultures and communities across our state and across our planet that have long understood gender to be greater than only two options. On this continent, there have been numerous Indigenous communities that recognize more than two genders or gender roles. Those individuals often held special and honored roles in their communities. Historically, different tribes have had a variety of different words and ways to describe individuals who fell outside of that binary. And somewhere in the early 90s, the pan-tribal term two-spirit was coined to create a shared language to talk about this culture and.
So you notice how he says that different cultures held those who didn't fall in the gender binary, they held them with higher esteem, higher regard. They were special, they were unique, almost, I feel, worshipped, put on a pedestal. Again, this gets to the religious aspects of gender ideology, and that the transgender child is special, to be held up, to be revered, to be love bombed, to be nurtured, to be celebrated in this very unique way. And again, this just smacks to me of a very kind of religious ideation, and kind of this language used for young kids who are constantly seeking approval from adults. I have volunteered, 5 kids, volunteered many times in classrooms, continue to do so. I am around young, small children all the time. And that need of validation from adults, and this really sweet and loving way that kids can be, particularly when you're in the classroom. And that after one day of volunteering in a 5K class, I'll have several of the kids, I love you, Miss Scarlett, I love you. They're so open, they're so innocent, they're so they so want to please the adults in their life at this time, and especially like their teachers. So if the message is coming across that you are special and unique and so different and so elevated, if you are a person with a unique gender identity, and there's so many, they are just infinite, and it can change every day. Your gender expression is just something you wake up every morning and you have to think, how do I feel today? And there's a lot of books in the future, I'll kind of point that out. There's a lot of books for young kids that reflect that. I know that this is about, with these books that are geared toward very young kids, I think they're very psychologically manipulative, and they could cause a disruption for a child, particularly at this point where I've had 5 kids, 4-year-old kids, 5-year-old kids, they still believe in Santa Claus. They still believe in the Tooth Fairy. They believe that that Tinkerbell actually flies if you go to Disney World. So I think that this language being used is being used purposefully, and in the end, it could be very detrimental for kids.
Tradition. Something that's really important to point out, particularly if you're working with non-Indigenous or non-Native youth, is that this is a culturally specific term and should not be claimed by young people who aren't part of Indigenous communities. And I think that's the gender snow person. That's kind of what I wanted to cover.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just realized I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, so I'm going to do that while I unshare my slides. So I'm Molly Herman. I'm an education consultant at the Department of Public Instruction, and I'm hosting a series of these that I hope, as demonstrated so far, will be approachable and also, conversational, so that folks can really relate to them. So next question. Brian, how have you seen?
Again, you can see this is a training module. paid for by the group that is responsible for some of the funding. This is a federal group, and it's also paid for with Wisconsin tax dollars, but it is also paid for with grants from federal dollars. It's funded by the Project Aware.
School folks, like, what have you seen folks do with this model or something similar? Is it helpful to walk through it with students? Can it be used in a gender and sexuality alliance or with GSAs? And then can somebody just like draw it? Because, you know, not everyone has access to all the slides of all the things. So talk to me a little bit about the use for it and your thoughts on that.
Yeah. The first thing I thought of when you asked, you know, can people just draw it? I'm like, you know, circles are really hard to draw on dry erase boards or whiteboards or chalkboards.
So right here, dry erase boards, whiteboards, chalkboards. This is all that they will use in classroom. So this drawing the gender snow person for elementary aged children, and I have some pictures of what that would look like. So this professional development is not just meant for teachers to watch and, you know, go about their day. This is a module that they can use in reference, and materials I'm sure are available so that they can go back to their classrooms and draw the gender snow person, and everything that we have just watched and some that we didn't, because I was trying to keep this shorter. This will be relayed to children.
You know, so if you can make some reasonably good circles, or even if you can't, right, you absolutely can just draw it. You don't need this slide, right? This is something that's really easy to throw on a piece of flip chart paper and just draw out. And oftentimes you can just create the snow person as you're talking about these different identities to really show how they all build upon each other and they're all interconnected and yet still separate from each other. So yes to all of the above. So with that having been said, I do want to say something I would strongly encourage educators not to do with this model. And I've seen some people hit some road bumps or some bumpy spots when they do this. So I really want to encourage people to really be thoughtful about this. But I would never require students to fill this out for themselves and or require them to share their identities with others or as a class assignment. That can easily place students in not only an uncomfortable situation, but also an unsafe situation for lots of different reasons. You know, we can definitely
unsafe situation. Read between the lines here. I think what is being implied, in my opinion, and I've watched a lot of professional development, don't require kids to draw this and bring it home to mom and dad. Maybe don't give kids a worksheet that they take home, because you could put them in an unsafe situation. Meaning parents are going to find out what you're doing in class and they're going to get mad, and then they're going to go to the school board and complain, and then you're going to have to deal with it. This is, you know, when creating an allyship with the child that excludes parents. Also, often used in professional development and in writing is the term co-conspirator. A teacher should become a co-conspirator with a child and imagine who they are conspiring against.
Definitely invite students to share their identities, but that should always be an invitation that we always extend but never require. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think sometimes people get excited by this and it's like, I'm going to have everybody fill it out for themselves.
It's a worksheet.
Yep. So it's not a worksheet. It's not an assignment that goes home to be like, fill this out and bring it back
not
to the classroom. It's a way to help students think about the identities that we all have. And it might help them think about how to articulate their own identities, but it's not something.
Help the kids to articulate their own identities in the classroom, outside of the home, outside of the family, not including the parent. I don't hear anything about an opt-out. This is a conversation about gender and sexuality. Wisconsin statute says very clearly that when those conversations are engaged, parents have to be notified and given the right to opt out. They can opt their child out of any conversations about gender, sexuality, human growth, and development. This is very clear. I believe that often it is professional development like this that serves as a wink and a nod. Maybe there's a way to avoid alerting parents.
That's required. So that having been said, we found this model to be accessible for all grade levels. You know, there's other models out there, and they all have their pros and cons. But this one definitely feels something that you can use with all age levels, and you can definitely adjust your language for younger as well as older audiences. And so thinking about younger audiences, right? Some of the language that I used to describe this, you know, earlier, I wouldn't use that language, right? Because that's going to be above their heads. But for example, we might say when we're talking about sex assigned at birth, we could say, you know, it's what the doctors thought you were when you were born, or it's what everyone assumed you were, or said you were when you were born. So that's maybe a simpler way to describe sex assigned at birth.
So again, you're to talk with very young children, kindergartners on up, sex assigned at birth.
Your private parts, right? Gender identity could be defined as how you feel, or maybe who you are, boy, girl, both, or neither, right? So that's a really simple way to explain.
Again, talking to very young kids, you could be a boy or a girl, or both, or neither, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what students will be told.
That. And then sexual orientation can simply be, you know, who you loved or who you're attracted to, or maybe someone that you want to marry someday, right? And sometimes students will ask, well, you know, can two boys, you know, get married or two girls get married? And the answer is no, because they're not old enough, right? Maybe when they get older, maybe they can. So it depends. And that's something that they might figure out as they get older. And really, it doesn't have to be more complex than that. And I'm sure everybody out there, you know, raise your hand if you've ever given students a longer answer and a more detailed answer or response to a question than what they're actually looking for. So I think when we think about talking about these topics, we have the urge to either say nothing at all or to give too much information. But we definitely can share simple answers and simple definitions with our students. And as I mentioned, I think I said this, I usually include the caveat when I'm working with a SNO person that there, again, are different models and ways to represent these ideas. Again, they all have their different strengths and weaknesses. It's just one, this is just one model that seems to work pretty well for GSAFE. So thinking a little bit more about your question, you had asked about GSAs, or gender and sexuality alliances, which are school-based clubs at the high school, middle school, and sometimes elementary level to.
So now we're talking about gender sexuality alliances. These used to be called gay straight alliances. They are now called gender sexuality alliances, GSA clubs. They are in every public school in the state of Wisconsin. I would venture to say I don't know of a public school that does not have one in the middle school and high school. And lots of times they meet after school, like for example, in Sheboygan Falls, they can meet during the school hour. So I've heard of that. And there's usually a display case, middle school or high school. There'll be a lot of signs. And so we'll just
create safe spaces for LGBT youth, as well as youth with LGBT families, and just people who want to make sure schools are safe for those students to just be together. I've seen GSAs use this or similar models as a springboard for discussions, really just about the diversity of identities and how individuals might share the same identities, but maybe understand them in different ways. And so that can be a springboard for that discussion. There's no right way to be your gender identity. There's no right way to be your sexual orientation. That really varies from person to person.
So you're getting an insight into the discussions that educators will have with children in Wisconsin public schools. And this module is similar. It's not like they're very unique. It will be the same, Wisconsin, California, wherever. It's the same thing.
GSAs might use this model to think about how classmates who hold different identities might or might not feel like they fit in with the club, right? It can help them think about, are there people that we're forgetting? And then let's take action to create a more welcome welcoming and inclusive space.
So they're recruiting.
And GSA sometimes use this for presentations to their peers, right? With the goal of fostering better
Again, recruiting.
Understanding of LGBT students. So it can be a teaching tool and giving students a sense of power to both talk about their identities and see themselves represented at the same time. And really, we know that when students better understand each other's differences, really they're just better equipped to be respectful of each other, even if they don't fully understand or maybe even agree with someone's identity. And I always like to remind people of that. It's like, you don't have to agree, you don't always have to fully understand. But one of the goals of public education is to prepare students to live, work, and learn with a wide range of diverse individuals, and that includes LGBTQ plus folks. Also, just like a final thought to your question, I've definitely seen some educators or student clubs use this model as a springboard to talk about the broad diversity of identities. And again, how some cultures, right, particularly some indigenous peoples across the world, have a long and rich traditions of seeing gender as more than simply the binary that we're often faced with or presented with in our culture and community here in Wisconsin.
So they're talking about a lot of the cultural tradition that seeing gender as a binary is uniquely Western. That's what they're getting, that this is a concept that's Western, and it's one of those white supremacy concepts that need to go. And it's going to be the radical activists that bring about this new world where there is no gender. So I think that's it for right now, because I just thought it would be interesting to kind of go through one of these trainings, just like bit by bit, and there's a heck of a lot more. Oh, I see someone saying, hey. I don't usually, hey, I am new to this and I am going to get better at it. Because I do a lot of research. I spend a lot of time pouring through this professional development. And I think that try to get it across on Twitter, but you're trying to get it across in these like little tiny bites. And a lot of people always have so many questions about what's going on in public schools, what's going on in Wisconsin public schools. And if you're watching this and you're not in Wisconsin, believe me, you could find this in it's very, very likely you're going to find something like this in your district. We do have several amazing school boards that are respecting parental rights, and they are working very hard to remove gender ideology and those concepts, particularly for young students, elementary students and middle school students, because this is, and when you look at the polling data, parents do not want educators, teachers, school counselors discussing things like gender identity, gender expression, sexuality, comprehensive sex education. They do not want anyone discussing these concepts with their 5-year-old, their 6-year-old, up into middle school, I think. And then even in high school, there are parents that feel strongly, they hold certain values and they want to be sure that they are a part of the conversation when discussing topics as difficult, as complicated, as confusing as the topics that these two presenters are so glibly discussing. In their space, they talk about this all the time. They live in a bubble. Do they even have children? I don't know, but they're in an echo chamber. So they think everyone talks about gender identity and gender expression and sex is just a binary. They think everyone sits down, their 3-year-old, and reads books, like the one I have right here. I might as well bring this up. Me and My Gender Dysphoria Monster, made for 4-year-olds. So they think everyone is sitting down with their kids reading about gender dysphoria. And that's just not the case. Most Americans are not doing that. Most people are not doing that. And particularly when he talks about all these other cultures that just have this very diverse view of gender. I mean, seriously, have they watched the Matt Walsh What is a Woman show? If you go into indigenous cultures, they're going to look at you like you have three eyes if you start talking to them about, oh, there's so many different genders. A man can be a woman can be a man, you could be non-binary, you could consider yourself a rock, or you can be a furry, whatever it is. They'll look at you like you're crazy. So this is, I am definitely, I'm not a scientist, but I think that I can figure out pretty easily that a lot of what is being passed off as science is pseudoscience, and it is not based on scientific data. This just doesn't make any sense, and I think it's completely inappropriate to include children in these kinds of conversations, particularly when they are not getting the consent of parents. And there are so many examples in Wisconsin where these conversations are being had in classrooms, even in very blue areas like Dane County, where parents discover after the fact that there's been a day about pronouns and a day with me and my gender dysphoria monster, or reading I Am Jazz about a boy that transitions into a girl. And they're upset, and they consider themselves, they're Democrats, they consider themselves pretty liberal, but they are upset that this was a discussion had without them present, without their knowledge, without their input. They worry this might be a little too young and too confusing. It doesn't make sense that you would talk to kids about these kinds of things so young. But I think the goal of gender ideology is to teach adults to suppress that instinct inside of us, as parents, sort of our spidey senses. Suppress that, because that's, white supremacy. And yes, if you haven't heard that before, if you aren't on board the gender ideology train, that is white supremacy. It doesn't matter if you're like me, Puerto Rican, it doesn't matter what. That's a vestige of whiteness, and whiteness is capitalism and the whole Western way of life. So, and that has to go. And this is a way for it to happen. This is a critical theory that is meant to disrupt and dismantle our way of life and our traditional values, our traditional Western values, and our society as a whole. So on that super happy note, I will end this, and I'll do it again. I'll do it maybe tomorrow, because there's a lot more material. So and it's on the Wisconsin DPI website, and I'll put some links out. So have a good day, everyone. And I will be on Vicki McKenna's show today at 2:15 on WISN 1130 iHeartRadio, and we're going to be discussing this topic. So tune in.